When Michael Harris tried to enjoy his own waterfront property, the HOA, led by the inflexible Caroline Bennett, blocked his boat ramp, turning a dream into frustration. Caroline's strict, controlling demeanor seemed determined to punish him for asserting his rights. But Michael's clever move to buy the surrounding shoreline completely flipped the situation in his favor. And just wait until you see how this quiet battle against bureaucracy ended, with justice triumphing in the most surprising way. Michael Harris had spent years dreaming about this moment, the day he would finally own a lakefront property, a quiet escape from the clamor of city life, nestled on the serene banks of a North Carolina lake. The house was perfect, whitewashed siding reflecting the sunlight, a small dock stretching into the water, and a sloping lawn that seemed to invite him to step right into nature. From the first day he toured the property, he imagined himself launching his boat, hearing the gentle splash as it hit the water, and spending long summer evenings fishing under the setting sun. The idea of his very own private boat ramp wasn't just a convenience. It was a symbol of freedom, a tangible reward for years of hard work and saving. For weeks, Michael meticulously planned the construction of the ramp. He consulted engineers, measured distances, and studied lake regulations. Every calculation was precise, every detail accounted for. He envisioned friends visiting on weekends, kids laughing as they paddled in canoes, and evenings spent sitting by the water's edge, reflecting on life's simple pleasures. The excitement was almost palpable. The lake promised a life of peace, recreation, and personal fulfillment. Then, the letter arrived. Michael hadn't expected conflict. HOA notices were usually administrative, a polite reminder to mow lawns or trim hedges. But this one was different. It was formal, stiff, and intimidating. The association claimed that his planned boat ramp violated community regulations and demanded he halt construction immediately. Michael reread the words multiple times, hoping he had misinterpreted them. But the meaning was unmistakable. The HOA intended to restrict him from using the very land he legally owned. Confusion quickly turned into disbelief. How could a homeowners association, a group theoretically designed to maintain neighborhood standards, impose such a restriction? Michael began calling board members, leaving polite voicemails, and emailing detailed explanations, providing every legal document and survey, confirming that his ramp was entirely compliant with local codes. Each response, however, was polite but firm. The rules, they said, were non-negotiable. And then he met Caroline Bennett. She was the president of the HOA and notorious in the community for her strict enforcement of rules. Michael had heard whispers from neighbors. Caroline had a reputation for being rigid, almost domineering, the kind of person who believed in control above compromise. Seeing her in person, Michael understood why. She carried herself with unshakable confidence, a sharp gaze that seemed to measure every word, every intention, and a voice that left no room for argument. Caroline explained, without a hint of empathy, that the ramp could not exist because it set a precedent and disturbed the visual harmony of the lakefront. Michael tried to argue, to reason, to point out the absurdity of restricting a property owner's access to water he legally owned. But Caroline's smile never wavered. Anger surged like wildfire. It wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was about principle, fairness, and respect for ownership. How could such a small group of people impose their will over someone's property in the 21st century? Michael felt a mix of indignation and frustration, a sense of betrayal by a system that promised community, but instead delivered arbitrary restrictions. Every glance at the water, every imagined weekend on the lake, now carried the sting of injustice. He paced the lawn late into the night, the gentle lapping of the lake at odds with the turmoil in his mind. The dream of peaceful weekends and freedom on his own land had collided with bureaucracy and rigid authority, leaving him stunned, furious, and desperate for a way forward. And as the stars reflected on the placid water, Michael realized that this was more than a fight over a boat ramp. It was a fight for his rights, his property, and the life he had worked so hard to build. After the initial shock of the HOA's ruling, Michael Harris thought he could reason with them. He gathered every document, survey, and permit that proved the legality of his boat ramp. Every page was meticulously prepared, highlighted with clear notes and references to county regulations. He was confident that logic and proof would prevail. After all, he was simply asking to use the property he had worked so hard to acquire. But Caroline Bennett, the HOA president, remained unmoved. Her smile, calm yet firm, seemed almost designed to dismiss his frustration before it could fully take hold. "We're just following the rules," she said, her tone icy and unyielding, as if the rules themselves were more important than fairness or human decency. Michael attended HOA meetings with a mixture of hope and dread. Each session, however, became a theater of humiliation. He would enter the room, documents in hand, only to feel the eyes of neighbors on him, curious, skeptical, or quietly critical. Every sideways glance, every whispered comment, reminded him that he was the outsider challenging the status quo. Caroline presided over the meetings like a judge, controlling the discussion and dismissing objections with surgical precision. Michael would speak, citing legal codes and community precedents, only to be cut off politely but firmly. His voice, which had carried the confidence of preparation, now wavered under the weight of judgment and collective scrutiny. It wasn't just the denial of his boat ramp that hurt. It was the deeper sense of betrayal. This community, which he had once imagined as welcoming and supportive, now felt alien and oppressive. He had trusted neighbors to act reasonably, to respect the principles of fairness and shared enjoyment of the lake. Instead, he faced a rigid bureaucracy that treated him as a problem to manage rather than a neighbor to include. The sense of injustice gnawed at him quietly, steadily, until it became impossible to ignore. Every morning, he would wake and look out at the shimmering water. His dream still reflected in the gentle ripples, yet somehow unreachable. The boat ramp, once a symbol of freedom and personal joy, had become a reminder of limitation and frustration. Michael tried to channel his pain into action, spending late nights reviewing correspondence, drafting polite yet firm letters, and consulting legal advice. Each effort seemed to yield only more resistance. The lake, which had promised serenity and escape, now mirrored his growing despair. Walking along the shoreline, he felt the isolation acutely. The same dock where he had imagined launching his boat was now a stage for conflict, a constant reminder that his vision for happiness was being denied. The community he had hoped to join, to share moments of laughter and leisure, now seemed like a fortress with rules and personalities standing between him and the simple pleasure of his own property. Even casual encounters with neighbors carried subtle reminders of his struggle. A nod here, a polite avoidance there, reinforced the sense that he was alone in his fight. Caroline, ever composed, maintained her position without a hint of doubt or sympathy, and her unwavering control amplified Michael's feelings of helplessness. The injustice wasn't dramatic in the way of grand confrontation. It was quieter, insidious, and persistent. It crept into every aspect of his life by the lake, turning the dream he had so carefully built into a source of anxiety, disappointment, and sorrow. Michael's pain was not only emotional, it was existential. The ramp was more than wood and concrete. It represented freedom, agency, and the right to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Each day that passed without progress, each meeting that ended without resolution, reminded him that he was powerless against a system that prioritized rules over fairness. And yet, amid the ache, a flicker of determination began to take root. He could feel it quietly beneath the frustration, a small but steady ember of resolve. The pain was heavy, but it was not yet final. After weeks of enduring the cold indifference of the HOA and the subtle judgment of his neighbors, Michael Harris felt the heavy weight of despair beginning to shift. The pain of exclusion and the sting of injustice had forged in him a quiet determination. He realized that complaining or negotiating further with Caroline Bennett and her rigid committee might never yield results. Instead, he decided to take control in the only way that truly mattered, by creating a solution that was entirely his own. This was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming agency, about transforming helplessness into possibility. Michael began to research the surrounding area with meticulous care. Every available record, every listing, every legal filing was examined. He discovered something that sparked a surge of cautious optimism. Several neighboring waterfront lots, including the very parcel that had been the source of the HOA's objections, were listed for sale. This revelation felt almost like fate, a hidden opportunity that had been waiting for the right moment. Michael realized that if he could acquire these properties, he could secure his dream boat ramp while also removing the HOA's leverage entirely. The idea was audacious, but the embers of hope now burned brighter than the embers of frustration. Finances were a challenge. Michael had saved diligently over the years, but buying multiple waterfront properties required more than savings alone. He met with lenders, carefully presenting his plan and demonstrating that the acquisition was both feasible and sustainable. Each meeting was a step toward reclaiming the life he had envisioned, and each small approval, every handshake, every signed form, felt like a victory in its own right. For the first time in months, Michael felt momentum on his side, a forward motion that replaced the stagnation of endless meetings and dismissive comments. When the purchase process was complete, Michael became the proud owner of the entire stretch of available shoreline. The boat ramp that had been a point of contention was now fully under his control, legally unassailable and completely functional. He could finally use the lake as he had always imagined, launching boats, enjoying quiet mornings by the water and sharing the experience with friends and family. What had once been a source of tension and humiliation was now a symbol of resilience and strategic thinking. The response from the HOA and Caroline Bennett was immediate and revealing. At the next meeting, whispers spread quickly as the committee realized that their authority over water access had vanished overnight. Caroline's carefully constructed rules and their rigid enforcement had not only failed to restrict Michael, they had inadvertently spurred him into a position of complete control. Her usual composure faltered under the weight of this unexpected outcome. For the first time, she was confronted with a reality in which her efforts to assert dominance were entirely neutralized. The HOA, once confident in its governance, found itself unable to influence or limit the very access it had sought to regulate. Michael's triumph was not merely a personal victory. It was a testament to perseverance and clever problem-solving. By refusing to accept helplessness, he had reshaped the playing field entirely. What had begun as a source of pain and frustration transformed into empowerment. He had not needed confrontation, litigation, or endless arguments to achieve justice. Instead, through determination, planning, and decisive action, he had rewritten the rules of engagement in his favor. Walking along the newly acquired shoreline for the first time as the owner of the entire strip, Michael felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The water shimmered under the early morning sun, and the boat ramp stood ready, unimpeded, as a tangible reminder of the power of persistence. The months of uncertainty, the whispered judgments, and the hollow meetings were now part of a past that had been decisively overcome. He had converted his pain into strategy, his frustration into opportunity, and in doing so, he had created not only access to the lake, but also a narrative of triumph that would resonate for years to come. For Michael Harris, hope had become action, and action had become victory. The quiet lake, once a stage for conflict and exclusion, had been transformed into a personal sanctuary, a symbol of resilience, vision, and the enduring human capacity to turn adversity into opportunity. Michael Harris stood on the freshly built boat ramp, the early morning sun reflecting off the gentle ripples of the lake. A soft breeze carried the scent of water and pine, and for the first time in months, he felt an overwhelming sense of serenity and accomplishment. It wasn't just the tangible triumph of securing his dream that filled him. It was the journey itself. The transformation from frustration and helplessness to clarity, strategy, and ultimately, victory. As he looked across the water, the shore now entirely under his ownership, Michael realized that his story could serve as more than a personal win. It could become a quiet beacon for others who face their own forms of unnecessary restrictions or rigid bureaucracy. What struck him most profoundly was that none of this required confrontation in the traditional sense. There had been no shouting matches, no threats, no acts of defiance that crossed ethical lines. Instead, Michael's approach had been rooted in persistence, creativity, and careful action. He had transformed adversity into opportunity by thinking beyond the immediate obstacles, researching every available option, and taking decisive steps to secure control of what was rightfully his. This realization was both humbling and empowering. Often, the most effective form of resistance is not aggression, but persistence combined with informed strategy. Word of Michael's success began to ripple quietly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once watched him endure humiliating HOA meetings now looked at him with a mixture of respect and renewed self-confidence. Some approached him privately, asking how he had managed to navigate what had seemed an insurmountable problem. Michael shared his experiences openly, emphasizing that the key was not anger or resentment, but careful observation, thoughtful planning, and the courage to act when the opportunity arose. His story became a subtle lesson in empowerment. It showed that even the smallest individual, when persistent and strategic, could reclaim agency from structures that seemed immovable. As days passed, Michael noticed changes in the community dynamic. Where once there had been unquestioned compliance with HOA edicts, a newfound sense of awareness began to emerge. Neighbors became more conscious of their rights, more willing to speak up, and more determined to protect their personal spaces and dreams. Michael's victory had not only secured his boat ramp and waterfront, but had also subtly challenged the community to rethink complacency by turning a personal conflict into a demonstrable example of resilience and proactive problem solving. He had inspired those around him to take their own stakes in life seriously. Standing on the ramp, Michael reflected on the lessons this experience had taught him. Persistence, patience, and thoughtful action could shift even deeply entrenched power dynamics. Injustice, he realized, often thrives not because it is strong, but because people accept it quietly. And sometimes, to restore balance and ensure fairness, one must step beyond the usual limits, think creatively, and act decisively without compromising integrity or values. His journey was proof that individual initiative, guided by principle and intelligence, could transform obstacles into stepping stones. The lake stretched endlessly before him, calm and inviting, a mirror reflecting not only the sky, but the journey he had undertaken. Every morning he would return to this place, knowing that the tranquility of the water was matched only by the satisfaction of having turned a deeply frustrating challenge into a story of triumph. Michael understood that his experience would stay with him long after the boat ramp was used or the lake visited. It had become a part of his character, a demonstration of the quiet power of resilience and inspiration. Ultimately, Michael's story was not about the conflict itself, but about the human spirit's ability to navigate bureaucracy, transform adversity, and inspire others along the way. In reclaiming what was his by right, he had done more than achieve a personal goal. He had shown that justice, when pursued with clarity, courage, and determination, can lead to outcomes that uplift not just one individual, but an entire community. The boat ramp, now a symbol of perseverance, stood as a reminder. Sometimes the boldest victories are those won with patience, strategy, and unwavering belief in one's own potential.